Yay, it's springtime. Everybody's happy because we had such a long winter. So I thought I'd do a video on the myths of the seasons. Basically, these are stories about why we have seasons. Basically, I mean, most of you out there know already the Greek story of Persephone and her mother Demeter. Briefly, the story goes Persephone's out picking flowers, and whenever a young girl is out picking flowers, nothing good is going to come out of that. So she's picking flowers, and Hades sees her, falls in love. The earth opens up, he grabs her, they go to Hades, and he marries her. Demeter, her mother, is very upset by this, and she basically goes in search for her, doesn't find her, and while she's mourning, the whole world kind of goes to sleep, in a sense. Things stop growing, animals stop reproducing, and winter comes, and the only way they can get winter to stop is to send Hermes down to the underworld and tell Hades, hey, you got to let Persephone up because, the earth is dying out there. And but because Persephone ate some of the food of the underworld, she is obligated to stay there. So they come to a compromise where Persephone spends part of the year with Hades as the queen of the underworld, and the other part of the year with her mother Demeter, and that's when we have springtime. Yay! But this is in a large part of the world, especially the Near East. This is a very common motif, basically, of somebody sort of dying and coming back from the underworld periodically, so that we have the changing of the seasons. In this video, I want to mention a few others. For example, in one really incredible story that comes from Sumer, which are basically a civilization from Mesopotamia, which today is Iraq. We have amazing stories. One Sumerian story is called the Descent of Inanna into the Underworld. Now, Inanna is a sort of love goddess from Sumer. She also represents Venus, the morning star, and for reasons unknown, although according to one scholar named Samuel Noah Kramer, it was due to ambition. Inanna is the queen of heaven and earth, but she wants to be queen of the underworld too. She wants everything. So she decides to visit the underworld and visit her sister, who's the present ruler of the underworld, and her name is Erishkigal. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but we have to go with that. So she visits Erishkigal, thinking she could take over her kingdom of the underworld, and Inanna could therefore be queen of heaven, earth, and the underworld. But when she gets there, she kind of hits a snag. There are 7 gates to the underworld, and each gate, because of the laws of the underworld, she has to give up something that she's wearing. And at every gate, she gives up a piece of jewelry, bracelet, breastplate, her crown, until finally, at the last gate, she has to give up her garment. So she appears before her sister naked and vulnerable. And when she gets there, her sister and the judges of the underworld, called the Anunnaki, they cast on her the eye of death, and they kill her. And not only do they kill her, they hang her on a hook. So there she is on a nail or a hook, and there she is hanging in the underworld, dead. But Inanna prepared for this. She told her servant, after a certain amount of time, if I don't come back, take certain precautions that you manage to get me back. So the servant, who's very wise, she goes to the god Enki, and Enki comes up with a plan. He takes dirt from underneath his fingernails, and he creates 2 beings. And these beings are sexless. They have no sex. And these beings are sent to the underworld with both the food and the water of life. And they go to the underworld, and apparently they find the queen of the underworld, Erishkigal, suffering from labor pains. And they they suffer along with her and calm her and ease her pain. And she's so happy. She tells these two beings, "I'll give you anything you want because you helped me so much." And they said, "Oh, we want to bring Inanna to life again." And she says, "Yeah, all right." So they splash on her the water of life and the food of life, and she's resurrected. But another rule of the underworld is you can't leave the underworld unless there's a substitute. So Inanna, she's followed by a whole group of demons called the Gala demons. And the Gala demons are there to make sure that they're going to find a substitute on Earth, along with once Inanna leaves. So there's Inanna. She leaves the underworld, followed by this train of these demons. And she comes across various people who are mourning her death. And she doesn't want the Gala demons to take away to the underworld anybody that was mourning her death. But then she comes across somebody who didn't seem to give a crap that she died. And that was her own husband, Dumuzi. Now, Dumuzi is the shepherd god. And she tells the Gala demons, or the Gala demons as they're also called, take him. So they go to poor Dumuzi and they try and grab him to drag him off to the underworld. Kind of like that movie, Drag Me to Hell. They try and drag him off to the underworld. But Dumuzi prays to the sun god, and says, "Help me." And the sun god changes him to a snake, and he slithers away. In an alternate version of the story, is something called Dumuzi's Dreams. There's an alternate version of how he tries to get away, and he prays to the sun god to help him escape, and he's made into a gazelle, and he runs away. But eventually the Gala demons catch up to him, and unfortunately poor Dumuzi is dragged off to hell, and there's nothing he could do about it. Some time passes, and Inanna is very sad that her husband took her place. And not only that, but her sister, Dumuzi's sister Geshtanana, she's upset and she's crying, and they come to a compromise. They say they manage to figure out a way to get Dumuzi back, and just like Persephone, Dumuzi is allowed to come back in part of the year, and in the other part of the year, his devoted sister, who mourned so much for him and was willing to give up so much for him, she spends part of the year in the underworld, and there we have the seasons. Dumuzi comes, and we have spring and summer, and then he goes back, and we have winter, kind of like the Greek story. I first came across this amazing story in this book here called Mythologies of the Ancient World, and it's edited by Samuel Noah Kramer. He's the scholar I told you about earlier in this video, how he's the one who figures out that the motive for Inanna wanting to go to the underworld is due to ambition. And in this essay, in Mythologies of the Underworld, there's a whole series of ancient essays from different scholars of mythologies of the ancient world, and it's a great book. And Kramer wrote the essay in here on Sumer and Akkad. Basically, in this version of the story, it ends with Dumuzi going to hell. It wasn't until I came across this wonderful book, and again, I didn't mention this book in my previous videos, in this wonderful book called Inanna, Queen of Heaven and Earth. I don't know if you can see it. I'm going to write it in the descriptions. In Inanna, Queen of Heaven and Earth, Her Stories and Hymns from Sumer. And this is a book written by Diane Wolkstein and co-written by the same scholar that edited this book, by Samuel Noah Kramer. See? Diane Wolkstein and Samuel Noah Kramer. And in this book, she tells all the major stories of Inanna, and I think she's a professional storyteller. And this is not so much a translation. I think it's more her own retellings of the stories. And it's a great book if you want a book just on Inanna. Now, the Akkadian writers, the writers after Sumer, basically the writers in Babylon and Assyria, they have their own version of the story. It's a little shorter, and it's called Ishtar's Descent to the Underworld, because in the Babylonian version, Inanna is known as Ishtar. And in this version is a little shorter, but it follows a lot of similar things. In this version, Ishtar demands to be led to gain entrance to the underworld. Otherwise, she'll bash down the gates of the underworld and let out the dead, and the dead will eat the living, and there'll be more dead than the living. And by the end of the story, which follows a little bit like the previous story, she leaves, but instead of finding a replacement for her, she is leaving her husband by the hand out of the underworld. And in Dumuzi, in this version, is called Tammuz. So in this story, Ishtar's descent to the underworld, she seems to go to the underworld not because of ambition, but because apparently her husband, the shepherd god Tammuz, died, and she went down there to get him. And then by the end of the story, she manages to do just that. So this is these are Mesopotamian stories of the seasons, and in the Near East there's other versions. There's other versions too. For example, another really funny story is that of let's see, the Hittites. I'm just checking my notes here to see if I didn't leave anything out. I mentioned the Babylon. Oh yeah, the Hittite in the Hittite version of the god that kind of dies and rises again and represents the seasons and fertility. The Hittites were a people that they were a great civilization and at one time an empire that ruled in modern-day Turkey. And they had an interesting story. I'll just give you a brief version. They had a god of fertility called Telepinu. And Telepinu, one day, for various reasons, I don't remember, he's really angry. He's pissed off. And he goes off into the steppes, into the steppe of Asia, and he falls asleep. And the world plunges into a type of winter where animals don't reproduce, crops don't grow. So the gods are really upset. We got to find Telepinu. Where did he go? He fell asleep somewhere. So they send an eagle. The eagle doesn't find him. Then they send a beer, a bee, not a beer. A beer would be a good idea too, but they didn't send a beer. No, they sent a bee. And they think, oh, one god laughs, a bee's not going to find him. But a bee actually manages to find him, and he stings him awake. And Telepinu now comes back, and it's a good thing that he's back, but now he's really extra pissed off because a bee stung him. So he has to be appeased, so the other gods call forth a god of healing, and so the god of healing kind of takes his rage and literally sends it off to the underworld to get rid of it. And finally, Telepinu is appeased and made happy again, and the earth is growing again. Now, of course, these stories come from a place where, it's the Near East. They don't really have winters like we do. So we have to think of this in terms of parts of the year, not so much that there's snow and ice, but more times of the year that they grow things and times of the year where things are not grown. Parts of the year that's fertile and parts of the year that's not fertile. In the land of Canaan, the myths of the Canaanites, the area around Lebanon and Syria, I believe the fertility cycle is every 7 years. I could be wrong, but I believe so. But anyway, I'm getting a little off topic. I'm going to mention one more little story from the Celtic world. I'm getting out of the Near East and I'm going into Europe, and I'm going to talk about Celtic lands, and they speak of a myth that has to do with the seasons, and that has to do with the goddess Bride, represents summer, and a beautiful young woman, and an old hag, sometimes called the blue hag, represents winter, and when things really get part of the year, the blue hag power grows, and she stomps around the mountains with this hammer, or sometimes it's a staff, and she pounds the earth with it, makes it frozen, and poor Bride is imprisoned somewhere in some sort of mountain, and her lover comes and rescues her, and the blue hag, her power gets weaker, and she puts her hammer under a holly bush until the following year, when her strength grows again, gets her hammer again and starts pounding the earth, making it frozen again. So that's just a very brief myth that the Celts have about the change of seasons. Here's a picture of the blue hag, with her staff climbing the mountain. She's kind of scary looking. This book, by the way, is a really nice little book. It's part of the Enchanted World series by Time Life Books, and this one is on Fairies and Elves. And it's a time Fairies and Elves. There you go, and it's a Time Life book. Yeah, so that's it for this video. I hope everybody has a nice spring and summer. Take care.